Okay, then let's continue with the next presentation. As I already mentioned in the intro when I was showing the agenda, when we were also hearing about that Europe takes an interesting role and a pioneering role also when it comes to ESG in the solar segment. And Marcello Passaro recently published a paper on this at the UPVSec conference in Bilbao in Spain, and he will give us a summary on his research. Marcello, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Well, I didn't solely write it. I stood on the shoulders of giants together with Paula and everybody from the European Technology Innovation Platform. But we'd be excited to share a bit of the results, but also a bit of the landscape of what's going on in ESG and some of the lessons that I've gotten from PV system ESG audits. So I'll give you a bit of background in that. I'll be.
You're frozen. Oops. Looks like his computer crashed. Marcello? Oops.
Sorry, my computer died for a second. I'm back again. Moment I pressed share screen, something happened. You'll see that always happens. If all is well, you should be able to see my screen, or it should be loading. Yeah? All right.
Good.
Okay, so I'll be talking a bit about how can you drive innovation through ESG instead of it just being a barrier, and what is needed in the market to drive these innovations. But who am I? A bit of a background in performance and reliability testing, production of PV modules in Europe, and quality control. Also did some in Europe and China. So I saw the lines of Jinko, who just presented in Shangrao, one of their lines. Do quite a bit of EPC contracts, O&M contracts, asset management. Because I'm a freelancer, I get to do a little bit of everything and every other day. I'm very proud Dutch Uruguayan person. So I'm going to give you the main takeaways. These are the 4 things I'm going to be telling you today to remember. These are the most important ones. Number 1 is that there are innovations that can help drive a just energy transition. Why do I say a just energy transition? It's because Oxfam just came up with a report. We'll be at the end of my presentation talking about the unjust energy for transition and what do they recommend. But one of the things that we really want to push is in circularity, not only recycling, because the purpose should be the reuse over recycling, and really start focusing on tandem cells to boost efficiency and really reduce our reliance on the critical raw materials, which is a whole list. And the EU is really trying to tackle that. The other one is look at the social licenses and labor. So have fair labor, diversity, equity, and inclusion rules, and make sure that renewable energy corporations, which is really being pushed by the European Union, have a one-stop shop to go to places on how to tackle development, how to get it financed, how to get a project fixed. But also very important is how do we bring the skills market from what is needed to support all this growth, be it in manufacturing, be it in development, be it in O&M. Solar Power Europe has a really good report on it, talking about O&M is one of the biggest growing markets. And nature and climate resilience. So if we build a project, it should be friendly to the biodiversity. There's also a EU nature restoration law, which kind of pushes that, but there should be a biodiversity gain. And the project should be able to work in this cold north of the Nordics and the warm, lovely sunny days of the Mediterranean. But those require different kind of web methods of designing, and maybe different kind of modules. Not every module suited for every location. And then accountability. Companies need to have a variable ESG criteria, make sure they have all their financing and regulations, and be fully transparent, like using SSI, because the Corporate Social Due Diligence Directive is coming up from 2027. That's going to be mandatory. So what is going on in the market? We have the corporate social responsibility directive. So number one, you need to measure what your environmental risk is to the outside world, but also the financial risk inwards for projects. Reporting, that means measuring and putting goals and how you're going to attain those goals. There's a standardization hereof. There's in the ESRS. And it's very important if we can get the data used in a standardized method, academics, R&D can use it to find innovative ways on how to report and to better report, or even make better conclusions on what we can do about it. And of course, very important is that if you're going to do something, it's better going to be that it's externally audited. Shouldn't be saying, I'm the best, have somebody else say, you're awesome. And make it really, really reliable. The other things that are going on is that we're trying to guide market integrity and investments. So if there is a risk, mention it. Mention there's a sustainability risk. For example, you're using PV modules with PFAS or Tedlar backsheets. That could be a sustainability risk. Look into it. The EU taxonomy, companies have to use a green business percentage. And there's an upcoming woman on boards. That there should be gender quotas for directors, for women in those boards. And if you're going to say, I'm the best and I'm going to do this, again, going back to the audit, in God I trust, and everybody else brings data. If you're going to make a claim, a green claim, show the scientific proof thereof. The next step is, of course, sustainability and a circular economy. So that's the EU eco design. There's part of the EU eco design and the EU battery regulation, where you have to have a digital passport showing real transparency and where things come from, how they're put together. Really, all the data should be, but really, as I mentioned before, it should be PFAS free. So it's the halogen group. Belgium has quite a bit of experience with halogens and the leaking thereof. This is something we can tackle, and it's very hard to work with. Yeah, if you're going to do waste, minimize the packaging and focus on the reuse of things like best containers. But also, if you're going to send it abroad, make sure that the modules could be repurposed instead of being used as a waste. There's the waste directive. It, of course, prioritizes reuse over recycling. I feel like I'm becoming a parrot and repeating myself, but 3 times said is then once understood. Accountability, there's a due diligence directive. There's a lot of legal companies that require a supply chain for ethical sourcing. So no forced labor, or the political understanding there might be forced labor in certain areas. That's why parties like SSI are there. Cybersecurity is becoming really important. We're going to an inverter-based grid. That means cybersecurity is going to be really important. There are some press releases about it that are concerning. That is why NIS2 certification, IEC 62443 are important, but also just simple things like don't use the same old password on inverters. That's something I come across often. There's a new carbon border tax. It's going to be a bit of a challenge. And of course, there's the Net Zero Industry Act, which is great for European module manufacturers, but also non-dominant module manufacturers like the ones from India. So, well, then we follow for the EU Green Deal. It's a law. It's a legal requirement for the finance. It's trying to push for domestic supply chains. So that's great for the manufacturing, which is my passion. And it has to make sure that everybody's accountable for via transparency what is going on. And it has to meet the EU taxonomy, just so that we can meet the Fit for 55. So 55% less global gas emissions, global warming gas emissions by 2030, as compared to 1990. How does this tie in with bankability? So everybody is always saying tier 1 is bankable. Yes, but tier 1 doesn't mean that it's completely bankable. You can have a tier 1 company, but have a poor Altman Z score. So that means maybe they're teeter-tottering close to bankruptcy. It just means have the discussion with them. But there are also aspects like the social bankability of a module. There are multiple certificates, instances like SSI that can do audits thereof. There's a technical bankability. So I talked earlier about having systems that are able for different kind of environments. There are different tests that come with that. And then there's a support bankability, so warranty conditions. But these bankability questions are not only for putting all the pressure on the module manufacturer, but it's for everyone. So you have the insurance needs to be double checked for bankability, the developer, the bank, all these factors come into play. But that's why, even though modules, there's a big step with the SSI. I had to update this. I only had 85 gigawatts. It's 95 gigawatts. So Rachel, thank you for the update. But it's one of the first real solar-specific supply chain sustainability programs, really good with traceability. And it's becoming an EU law, it's becoming an ESG mandatory compliance from 2027 onwards, because I think that was one of the questions. It's a CSDDD. But of course, it depends how each country then implements it. So yeah. But then there's also EcoVadis for ESG. EcoVadis is also changing things. You can, if you get a certain percentage, you get a gold revert, you get a silver award, you get a bronze award. But now you need to at least score 30 points in each category to even get a medal. And they're going to be doing a lot more via AI, checking out if you have no negative news or violations, legal violations or news violations in the last few years. And if you're caught, that can push you out for 5 or 8 years, if I call it correctly. Going back to the very top again, Oxfam says we can do things better. I mean, it's always good to listen to our critics and learn and see where we can improve. So they mentioned in the report, energy must serve life. So biodiversity, nature, not just profit, also the community. They argue for that everyone should have at least 1,000 kilowatt hours minimum access to energy. They argue about canceling debt, grants, and trying to get companies to stop corporate tax avoidance. But I think one of the most things that is the most easy to step is the local power, the shifting of control of communities and their consent of having those projects. Of course, we all know if you develop a project, you need a certain level of consent. But I do ESG audits for PV systems, or I have done. And I want to mention, just like standards and norms are the minimal that you can do. Permits are the requirement you have just to build a project. There is so much more that you can do that can show and monitor, and for your CSRD, be able to show, hey, I'm really making steps. So if you're going to say, hey, I have a biodiversity, my biodiversity goes up, have a party come in, check it out, make reports, it helps, and it also helps data for your CSRD. Focus on reuse. Do you think about decommissioning plans? Don't just, if you can decommission, make sure those modules are maybe able to be repurposed instead of just thrown onto a heap. And yeah, focus on one of the CSRD requirements, CSRD requirements is looking at all the waste, water consumption, waste gases, hazardous materials. Of course, we should get modules with a very small carbon footprint, 400 kilograms carbon equivalent per kilowatt peak would be awesome, or better. But it's also looking at the whole system. Get all that data, make sure that it's there. Also, when it comes to ESG audits, social audits, we can not only focus on the supply chain, but also the construction chain. There are subcontractors. Subcontractors may come from all walks of life. They may come from Philippines, Armenia, Ukraine. Check, do they have the right visas? Are they being treated well? Are they getting requirements according to the local labor laws? But the biggest thing that I notice is a lot of projects don't have community engagement plans. How is there a crowdfunding, or will they invite people over? Or it's like wind projects, there's always a community engagement plan. For solar, very rarely I see one. And I also, part of the social is that I often see within this a lot of safety issues, like people not wearing hats, not wearing the right personal protective equipment. Well, what can developers do? We have the nature restoration plans per country, which is part of the EU nature restoration law. You can help. Solar can play a huge role in that. The Net Zero Industry Act is great for the EU supply chain, but also for India and the US. Forced labor is a primary driver for parties like SSI, but for ethical supply chains. There are straight traceability methodologies. SSI has it, SEIA has it, but there's a big challenge with PFAS. PFAS is a pretty durable, good material to work with, but if we're going to shift away from PFAS and different backsheets, we need to look, okay, how, with academics, how do we can make sure that we have a good backsheet that can last very long for 25 years. And a big issue is cybersecurity. A lot of systems, the infrastructure, it's going to become, renewable is going to become a critical part of the infrastructure. We need to focus on cybersecurity. These are things I often see when I do audits, and I'm like, we could really work on this from a PV system standpoint. Well, all the things I said are not on behalf of ATIP. These are the real ATIP things that came out. The biggest, and it's kind of repeating what I said earlier, innovation circularity is most important. The design for circularity. Look at companies like Biosphere Solar that make modules that are able to be pulled apart and be put back together. Don't just focus on recycling. Look at R&D is one of the outcomes. Fair labor, diversity, equity, inclusion over the whole chain is important. But also make sure that a person from Poland can work in Netherlands or Germany or France or Portugal or Spain with the same accreditations, which is, for example, Inno Energy is working on. But as I mentioned before, community engagement plans are super important. If you're going to build a solar park, try to look at maybe different greenkeeping, or don't just put a beehive, but do something more that can really show the biodiversity gains. Building a solar park in itself is already a biodiversity gain, but there are different methodologies you can do and approaches, like the eco-certified from TNO and Wageningen University. And then the governance, and if you're going to do something, if you're going to build, maybe there's a probability for innovation to have platforms for renewable energy communities, which are driven by the Renewable Energy Directive in each country, that they have a place to go to on how to build projects, how to construct them, how to operate them, how to finance them. So I try to keep it short and sweet. I think I kept it within the time period. But yeah, if you have any questions, queries, headaches, just reach out or ask your questions now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marcello. That was indeed a crisp overview on what all is going on in ESG in Europe. So if anyone has questions, please put it in the chat. Thanks again, Marcello.